Well, hello everyone and welcome. I'm Amy Miller and President of the PhRMA Foundation. Welcome to today's webinar, which is on writing innovative grant applications in industry perspective. With me today, we have Dr. David Aldous. He currently is the head of global R&D process and operations for Sanofi. And I've asked him here today because he has long served on the PhRMA Foundation study sections for drug discovery and translational medicine. And by his service, he's helping the PhRMA Foundation keep our grant funding focused on innovative ways to do science in the future. So before I get started on the Q&A with Dave, I am going to go through a few slides to just tell you a little bit about the PhRMA Foundation. Our mission is to foster biomedical innovation and value-driven healthcare by investing in the frontiers of research. We catalyze promising careers through competitive, peer-reviewed grants and fellowships, and we're looking for the next leaders in the field. We value integrity, innovation, collaboration, and really good photos from our award winners. So if you happen to win one of our awards, please note we use real people in our slides. So this is a current award winner. We fund drug delivery, drug discovery, translational medicine, and value assessment and health outcomes research. The scholarships we offer are for pre-docs and postdocs, and then we do have an early career faculty grant. When you apply for a pre or postdoc, you can choose to be supported for between 12 and 24 months, and selecting 12, 18, or 24 months doesn't change how your project is evaluated. And for early career faculty, we do allow you to compete for our grants with startup funds. So we don't count off for startup funds, but if you do have a large award like an R01 or something similar to that magnitude, you are no longer qualified to compete for our funds. Key dates. So this is an auspicious time for you. On the Ides of March, we opened up our portal to accept letters of interest for translational medicine, drug discovery, and drug delivery. And for those of you who just competed for translational medicine, you'll hear from us soon if you got an award or not. But you will notice that we have opened it up again this year. We're doing that because we've had some very interesting projects come into translational medicine, drug delivery, and drug discovery, and they don't perfectly fit within the buckets. And so by aligning all three programs on the same timeline, will allow the chairs of the three committees to swap amongst themselves, making sure that your application is in the right bucket. And now for our Q&A. Hi, Dave. How are you today?
I'm good. And yourself, Amy?
I'm doing pretty well. It's a beautiful day. The cherry blossoms have peaked in DC, which is fantastic because there's nobody on the tidal basin on a Monday. It's lovely. So since I joined the organization about 2.5 years ago, I've taken a look at all of our processes and our committees, and I've tried to optimize them. And so one way that we've optimized is we've made sure all the committees are half industry and half academe. And we do that intentionally because we do want to find the next leaders that the pharmaceutical industry can hire. We want to find those leading scientists who will do the research on the outside that industry will benefit from, and that we have these great researchers training the next generation of scientists. So how did you first get involved with the foundation, and how long do you think you've been serving on our advisory committees?
So I was asked by the R&D leadership, would I get involved, because the activities that the foundation and the committee is involved in is important. Is it, it shares with the broader public, the valuable contributions that scientists make to health, to benefit society. I came in to work on the committee, I think 9-10 years ago, because of my expertise in medicinal chemistry, drug discovery, and early development. So, you mentioned, Amy, that there's a mix on the committee, and the PhRMA Foundation is unique in that way, in that they include both industrial and academic scientists Why does the foundation do that?
We do it because we like to fund the research that's going to drive the engine of the pharmaceutical industry. We've throughout our history funded research that didn't really have a home anywhere else. And by having industry folks on our committees, we're making sure that we are directing our funds strategically to programs that are interesting to industry.
I see. Yeah, I also see it as a way of changing, training the future leaders, right, to explore new ideas. And I like the way the foundation is going about it as a funding body, right? It's really looking across the broad spectrum that's out there because we never know where there's going to be a breakthrough in science that may open up a potential therapeutic approach.
Absolutely. So we're looking for those bright, creative minds and looking at their interesting ideas. Another aspect to the foundation is that we're small and nimble. And so we can start a program on demand. For example, we started a digital health tools program last year, and we'll be making those awards in this coming year. And that's an example of how we can be responsive, in this case, to FDA's questions for industry. So it's a really nice organization in that way as well. So I would like to tell you a little bit about our application process, which I know you're familiar with. For drug discovery and delivery, and now starting the cycle, we are asking applicants to submit a 600-word LOI describing their research project. And when they turn that in, we also ask them to fill out a research impact question sheet that highlights how their work is tackling gaps in the field and benefits society. Based on that information, the committee decides whether they want to see an application, a full application from that applicant. So, sorry, I think I'm skipping ahead. When you read a letter of interest, what do you look for and what makes you want to see a full application?
Well, if you go for the letter of interest, right, I'd say there's two diametrically opposing thoughts here. One, is this in the current body of research that is ongoing, that's being published? Does it come with a different slant or one that makes it, more impactful or likely to actually deliver? And the other, which is where you get to that other part of this, is this an approach that I'd never thought about that's really coming at me from left field, and I need to think about it. And in that, it's if this asking the question, if this works, could it really open up into a fruitful area that would be beneficial to the awardee, but also to other scientists and lead into different types of training? So it's those two. Is it currently within the body, and is it something totally unexpected that could open up things?
So you're looking for letters of interest that get your scientific mind excited.
Yep.
Tell me about the research impact questions. How do you look at those, and what do you think the value of those are?
As you mentioned, and when you look at this, right, there are two real reasons here for what we're trying to do. One is this something that's a potential benefit to society, and will it train the next generation of leaders? So when you're looking about those impacts, what I start looking at here is this opening up new avenues? And in both cases, in the back of my mind is the question, how is this advancing the individual scientist expertise? So I'm looking at it from both ways here. Is it opening up the science, and is it opening up a possibility for training new leaders in the area?
And both that are fair for you, or are you looking for one, the other, or both combined?
I mean, it really is based on the actual proposal. One can overwhelm the other. You're looking for both, but I would say an ever present. There needs to be that training component, even if it's a current body or if it's a really exceptional idea out of left field. I'd still want to know that at the end of the day, the scientists, which at the end of the day, this is what it's about, the scientists, the future leaders are being trained in a way that will help them advance to become the people who are shaping the future of this environment.
Great. So when you're reading a letter of interest, you've seen, I think at this point, hundreds, maybe even 1,000. What are some tips that you'd like to give authors for letters of interest phase?
Well, this is where, what you want to do is make sure that you emphasize that value and impact. How is this going to benefit society? How is it going to advance, our knowledge of any particular area, immuno-oncology or a particular therapeutic or an in vivo model in terms of, will this give us a higher predictive of evidence for how we can go forward into the clinic? Again, if you look at those statements, it's also underpinning there that the person who's developing this, their training, their expertise, they'll become a subject matter expert, somebody that'll be highly sought after, who could either shape in academia or could go into industry to really shape those aspects going forward. So I think there in that's what I'm looking for in terms of where I get excited about those letters of interest.
And the way we judge the letters of interest is a yes or no statement. So what makes you get to know? And tell me first
Uh,
what makes you get to know super fast, and then
well,
what gets you to know a little further on down the line.
it's when you look at it and it's this is it's a screening tree and it's on a hit finding exercise. This is unless there's some aspect of the approach in the technology, so they're going to say single cell analysis of in terms of what they're doing. The other pet peeve for me, and you've heard me discuss this, Amy, is when we have poorly characterized tool compounds and a lot of extrapolation is made about that compound, saying this is really supportive of this new target for the following reasons, when the characterization of that tool compound doesn't really tell you a lot about the tool compound and whether or not it's solely selective for that target, or if there is a multitude of other things that are happening in the background.
Interesting. Well, let's move on to the full application. So when you get the full application, there is a lot of material to review. You have the extended statement, the personal statement of the applicant. You have the research proposal itself, and research impact questions and letters of support. What are you looking for in that big package? And I'm curious to know, what do you look at first? I know what I look at first. What do you look at first?
Well, first of all, I think everybody on the webinar needs to understand that there's a significant amount of pre-work that happens by the committee members before they show up. So everything that's in that package, all of those documentations, and it can get up to 60, 70 pages at times in terms of what comes through, is reviewed by two members of the committee. What I'm looking for that in that body of documentation that comes through, there's a connection. What's driving the scientists to pursue science? Is their path, however winding it's been, looking to a future in science? Is the proposal theirs? Is this stated in the letters of support? Does the mentor and the institution show support for their development and path to independence? This is what you're trying to look through here, is that there's a consistent message about the scientist and the proposal, that this is something that we want to support because it will fulfill those two aims. It'll open up something that we think is new on the science front, and it will lead to the development of a future leader who has a passion, whether it's in academia or industry, for the science.
So speaking of that, we do allow for an extended letter, and we've seen the gamut of letters from an applicant saying, I was on this research path, but then someone I loved got this disease, so I switched to this path, to someone just simply outlining their scientific journey in their extended letter. What content do you like to see in the extended letters?
Well, it gets back to that why science, right? I mean, why this particular aspect of science, why you're passionate to devote your future, the next 3, 10, 15, 40 years of your life. You're really on a journey which is going to be beyond the 10,000 hours that you need to get mastery. And that's where you're looking for that. There's a passion for science, but I'd also say there's a resilience. There's science can be cruel in that you can do everything right and still miss out, and you can do things wrong and suddenly stumble across something, but have a prepared mind that says and leads you to actually follow that new result so that you can go on. So it'll also show up in why we structure the proposal input that we want to see from people who are making the proposals.
And so when the committee meets, you talk a lot about feasibility of projects. And feel free to answer this for the three different categories: pre-doc, postdoc, and early career faculty. What do you mean when you think of feasibility of a project, or if you think of some of the conversations we've had about the lack of feasibility in a particular timeline? What advice would you give to applicants on this issue?
Well, yeah, as you said at the beginning, Amy, this is a 12 to 24-month period, right? And when you look at all the benchmark industry data on the research phase in industry for going from a target to a clinical candidate, it's 4 years. And yet we'll see aspects in the proposals that'll say they'll do this in 12 to 24 months. It's just not realistic. And that's what the people, when we get into the feasibility, is this aim. Do we believe that this aim can be accomplished in 6 to 12 months? And then you look at it and ask the same question about the second aim, which is if it's dependent. So there's really looking at the doability, the feasibility of that research in the time frame that's allowed. And that's true whether it's in the pre-doc or the postdoc or even the starter grants. There's, as you go through that spectrum, there tends to be more supporting preliminary data, and there's a better foundation to believe that they've refined their skills in certain areas, so they'll be able to accomplish more in that period. But it has to be realistic within the time frame and the aims of the stated proposal, particularly if those are dependent aims. So you need to complete one before you can do. Sometimes if you can do things in parallel, we'll ask the question, how feasible is it for one person to be running both of these aims at the same time? Because again, we want to make sure it's the student who's developing their skills to actually move on.
So let's unpack some of that a little bit. Interdependent aims are common in the applications. And I'm overstating this, but when we see interdependent aims, I see the committee react in two different ways. No. And interesting. Let's talk about it. With the no, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's because the applicant doesn't have a backup plan for when the first aim fails and you can't go to the second aim. So we don't fund those projects because we're just wasting money on one aim. So talk a little bit about the interdependent aims where the committee is interested and talks about it. How does that work?
Well, you gave the segue into that perfectly. It's okay. So you go in expecting X, and you get Y. What are you going to do? Where would you run with this? How would you take this forwards? It's a bit like you go in expecting that you're going to target a nodal point in a pathway, and that you're going to inhibit that. And lo and behold, what you weren't expecting is that there was a bypass or an alternative pathway. So now that nodal pathway isn't a node, it's just one of a series of pathways. But you may then be able to go lower down or further higher up in the stream, as some people may call it, to actually look at a different nodal. This is where we're looking at, if this doesn't work, what else would you do? And that's where there's a lot more conversation about, okay, did this follow a logical progression? And that's why the other thing that you haven't got onto, Amy, but is how much preliminary data, right? So the more data that you've got is good, because it lays that this isn't just a bias and a hypothesis, but there's some firm belief that you can actually do what you're doing, and there isn't some of these inherent flaws that you need a greater degree of plan B. The other side of that is, if you have too much data, then it's really, why do you need the grant, right? In terms of, is this really, have you already finished? So it's that Goldilocks approach that you've got to have just enough not too little, not too much, because it will lead into questions. And what we're trying to get at is, yes, you've got a good idea, you've got some inkling of the data here, and that preliminary data may also point to some of the alternative things that you need to think about. It's a bit like when you look at drug discovery, everybody comes forward telling you this is perfect, it's going to be, it's going to solve everybody's problem. That's great. That's the reasons to believe. What I ask people as well is, what are the reasons not to believe? What are the things that we need to take a look at, that we need to now de-risk this as we go forward, so that we've got both the positives and the negatives? And that's what we're getting at when we look at AIM-1, and where we're looking for alternative paths should AIM-1 fail, or should AIM-2 fail, because it means that you're not going to really get into AIM-3 or AIM-4 of your proposal.
Let's talk a little bit about prelim data a bit. We're aware that sometimes we fund faculty starter grants to get pilot data for a larger R01. The committee seems very happy to do that. What does preliminary data look like for the pre-doc and the post-doc category, or even in the faculty starter grant? Can it come from the literature? Can it come from the lab? Does it have to come from the applicant? Can you speak a little bit to where that preliminary data comes from?
I would say in the as you go earlier in this, you would be accepting, is it from the lab, is it preliminary data from the literature? As you go on later on, what you're looking for is, as you get into the starter grants, here is somebody that's really starting out to lay a foundation into their area of future subject matter expertise. And what you'd want to see in that preliminary data is a body of evidence that is pointing to the directions that they're pursuing for their future independent academic career. So they're moving away from their postdoc mentor or their doc mentor. It may have been in a similar area, but what you're looking for is that they've been building towards a body of evidence that is taking them forward on their own merit. Now, as you go earlier, some pre-docs, and you've seen this, Amy, where we've had somebody who's come in and they've written something which is totally their own idea, their own principal investigator and head of the department have spoken to this and said, this is, if it works, this could be really, breaking open a new area. So there's a range in this that we're looking for, of building off what the areas that have been established by their department or the literature, to really setting the groundwork for their own future independence. And it goes across that spectrum.
Do you think the committees you serve on fund maybe going to fail projects every cycle because you're excited about it and somebody's got to fail doing it? And if it does work, we're going to break something open?
It wouldn't be research if we didn't,
Right.
to be blunt about it. Whilst we want to fund winners, we know that that winner may look completely different to the proposal, which goes back to our previous discussion, why the aims need to have alternative paths that they can pursue. We want ultimately to be moving forward the body of knowledge in terms of therapeutics and health, but also the people who are going to be here in 10, 15 years, really shaping this ecosystem with their contributions to the science and the challenges to the way that we interpret the science.
So these may be unrelated, but they come together in my mind. When I'm listening to the committee discuss the applications, I hear a lot about statistical plans and mentoring plans. And you guys get very disappointed when there's not a statistical plan in the application for you to consider for all the levels, and when there's not a good a mentoring plan for the pre and post docs. Would you reflect a little bit on those two things, which I know are completely different, but you're dissatisfied with both of those things fairly regularly?
Yeah, so apart, my eldest daughter's studying for a PhD in biostats, right? So I'll just have that as a fair disclaimer right at the start. But you ask about the statistical plan, and it's really about wanting to ensure that there's a rigorous basis for the interpretations and the direction. and that it isn't just appearing because of bias. And this is people leaving out certain points because they thought they were outliers or whatever. So this is where we get into wanting to make sure that whatever is coming out is supported by the data. And that's why we get into a lot of discussion about the statistical plan. So if we flip this, and I see the link that you made here in terms of and it ties to the letters of support, right? So what we want to see is that there is a consideration of the student as an individual. So generic letters of reference or generic training plans really do get picked up by the members of the committee. Remember, some of us have been reading these for 10 years. So we know what the institutions are doing. We know that the various academic institutions out there have great facilities. They have great training. What we're looking for is this being tailored to the student's needs? And this is where you get into things like uh, uh, in the personal letter, I was reading thousands of lines for data analysis, and my training plan now includes programming so that I can do this in a more digital, automated type of way. That's the type of things that we're trying to pick up on in terms of saying, is this individual being looked after and really cared for to develop into the leader that we want to nurture for the future? And that requires the institution, the mentor, to be putting in time to think about that student and laying out this is their plan. It's not the plan that is being used for Dave. It's not the plan that's being used for Amy. It's not the plan it's their plan. And that's what we're looking for when we look at the mentor plan.
That's great. Back to letters of support. Let's dive into that a little bit. I did a postdoc, got it, and didn't write my own letters. But when I did a fellowship, my dissertation advisor asked me to write the letter for her, which I did. And I was a little surprised she asked me. So I used a lot of superlatives. It was not in her voice at all. It was in a ridiculous superlative voice. That's not even mine. And so when I went to the interview to get the fellowship, which I did get, I was surprised at how that letter stood out to them. Look at this enthusiastic letter of support that your advisor wrote you. And it took all my self-control not to turn red, because I kind of was wondering, well, did she even read it? Did she edit it? But now when I'm asked for letters of support for various things, I actually do ask for a draft. I read it, I rewrite it, I add my personal touches to the beginning and the end. But oftentimes the body, the history, all of that fact finding is very helpful if it's just sent to me. So tell me about how you think a person should prep their letter writers for this application process.
Well, you've hit on it, right? I mean, I'll say this bluntly: a generic letter doesn't do you any good in terms of it's going to come across, because it's not going to resonate with any of the things that are in Amy's letter, personal letter, in her resume, in her background. That's going to come through in other aspects of the documents. And if it isn't there in the letter of support, the question will be, does the department chair, does the PI really know Amy? And it casts a doubt about how she's going to be trained and move forward. So that's the first thing, that providing them with specific insights to you are key. One of the things that I always look for, and if it's not there, it is discussed, is in the letters of support. Is this Amy's idea? Is this Amy's proposal? And did Amy write this proposal herself? These are all looked at, and these are questions. I can't remember a time when there wasn't a proposal that the reviewer didn't make the specific statements that these were included in the letters of support and they were or that they weren't. And it was one of the reasons why they wanted to have the broader discussion. And people will go in, Amy didn't go over this, but people will go into the proposals and the letters of support, and they'll ask the questions. The other committee members will as we're discussing who to fund and who not to fund, they'll say, but this is missing. There's no that these letters, this looks a bit generic in terms of, so, it is really to be tailored to the applicant. I can't emphasize that enough.
Another letter of support topic is often you get a really interesting project and you'll need an outside expert because science is getting more complicated, right? So you might need an expertise you don't have. And somebody will say that in a proposal. And the difference, again, between a yes and a no, or a yes and a let's discuss, or no and a let's discuss is, well, you don't have any letters of support from any of that outside expertise you rely upon, versus you do have a letter of support from this outside expertise. And that's when the committee starts talking about it. Oh, they're in the same region, it'll work out. Oh, they used to be at that university, so they have this pre-existing collaboration. This will work out. Or on the other hand, they say they need this expertise, and yet there's no evidence that they have access to it. So I just wanted to make that point as well. That's another use of your letters of application, is to make sure that you've got what you need to do your project.
Yeah, and it speaks to one of the things that we do look for, which is collaboration, whether it's collaboration within the department, across departments, and it can even be across universities, right? As you said, drawing off the expertise that you need that's out there in the community, because at the end of the day, this is about increasing the science knowledge to enable us to better health.
And then before we move on, I did want to ask you about the figures and formatting of the images that come through. Sometimes I take a look at them and I can barely see them. Some are like microscopic. What are your thoughts on figures and formatting and images that appear in applications? Do you like them? Don't like them? What?
I do, but again, it's one of the, when you build in the proposal, it's all about what's the impact of what you're putting into the proposal, right? If you make the wording too small, if you make the figures too small, it becomes very difficult and irritating to actually read it, right? So what you want is, you want the clarity in the document, um, and it needs to be concise. So this is what, you didn't touch on this, but it's too much, and you did say, you can oversell. So the preliminary data can be sufficient to get to be teasing of the future, but it shouldn't be overselling of what that future should look like either. So when I'm looking at the formatting of the proposal, it's really to make sure that there's good clarity, and it's not too, not, as I say, not too small. I want to be able to read this on my laptop, to be honest with you.
Yes, another process when we're all together, people are looking at these things on their laptops. And so it's one thing to have it on your bigger screen, but in the room, when you're pulling up somebody else's application where you weren't the primary or the secondary reviewer, all you have is that laptop screen and 15 minutes to discuss it. So are we going to Zoom? Are we not going to Zoom? Maybe we shouldn't have to Zoom. So I want to move on to pre-doc and post-doc only questions. So for the pre and postdoc, we talked a little bit about the mentoring and training plans, but can you give a little more detail about what a good training plan looks like for you?
So it really depends on the area of science, right? In terms of what are critical aspects in terms of the proposal. So is it if you're developing a new animal model, are you being trained on the good husbandry to go along with the keeping of the animals, the development, the characterization of them, the ability to know when animals could or couldn't be used in the research that you're going to be involved in. Another aspect of it is, we talked about, is statistics, right? So there needs to be, are you going to be trained in aspects of the statistics, data gathering, as well as avoiding the bias. So it's, when you look at the training, it is really a future manifestation of the proposal as well, right? It's, you're getting trained in the different aspects of the proposal that you're laying out, and it sits alongside the research that you're doing to enhance you as a future scientific leader. That's where it's moving from the generic, or we're going to We're going to train Amy in programming to say that you've had a training in R, which allowed you to do the following for the studies that were being run.
So now we're going to move to the part where I ask your opinions on various things. And so this is Dave's opinion. May be applicable to you, maybe not. But let's say you're God and you get to say what areas of science everybody's going to look at in drug discovery or translational medicine or both. What excites you?
Well, I mean, so first of all, disclosure, right? I'm an asthmatic, so this is one of my things. So I'm very interested in immunology, inflammation, immuno-oncology, and the reason for that is, it's an inflammatory event that happens that triggers something that leads to a disease, right? So is what's happening with the body, and we're starting to unlock more and more understanding around immunology at the moment. And I think this is where we'll understand the pathways better. We'll understand what redundant pathways are there, what are bypass mechanisms, which will target into where there are areas that we feel there are opportunities for intervention for therapeutics, which ultimately will lead to better therapies and outcomes for patients who suffer from inflammation related diseases.
I think so. We had a really interesting evolution in oncology where we had targeted therapeutics that weren't necessarily for the lung or for the breast or for the prostate, but they were for a marker. And in non small cell lung cancer, we went from an abysmal survival rate to a pretty good one, and lots of therapeutics when we divided non small cell lung cancer into different biomarker driven tumors. That was really exciting. And I have eosinophilic esophagitis, which is another inflammatory condition mediated by the interleukin pathways. And so seeing all these interleukin medications come to market for different inflammatory diseases is fascinating. And I think we will get there where you'll get a medication for a pathway that is at the end of the day, and making the disease in the body. So it is a fascinating area. Science is so fun. Well, that's a great answer, but let's talk about pet peeves because all the committees have different personalities, and there's this one person who really gets mad when they see a bad proposal. It's not Dave. But what are some of your pet peeves, and phrase it in the form of just don't do this, please.
So again, I'll give you two, and they're going to be diametrically opposing. And the first one is it's badly written organization, formatting, or spelling, and sometimes and look, it just is all over the place, right? So I can guarantee you it's going to be an exchange between the two reviewers, and we shouldn't take this forward. I mean, they need to go away, and it's obvious that this hasn't been read by their mentor or the PI because there's no way they would let it go out. Okay, so that's the first one. And the reason I said they're opposing is the other one is when it comes over as a veteran professor's proposal. And then so now people are asking, is this a lift from a proposal that's in the lab, from the principal investigator, from the fully tenured professor? Because it will be weighed, that proposal will be looked at in the context of what does your personal letter look like? What are the other things that you've put in and written about? And does the voice look the same? So if it's disorganized, it's going to raise flags and it's going to be and if it's looking like it's a lift from a professor's proposal, which goes back to what we've talked about earlier, is this your idea? Is this your proposal? These are things that I mean, they're pet peeves for me, and certainly things that I've flagged with my co-reviewers when we've looked at this.
And I will say that many of the reviewers, when they feel something may be lifted, they'll go into the mentors research, publications underway, poster sessions, presentations, and do a little detective work to see if it is a little too good to be true. That said, we do encourage everyone to have their full proposal read by someone who isn't an expert in your science. So they should be, a scientist, or they should be able to read all the content and understand it. But to have that extra set of eyes, because they'll definitely catch things you don't catch. And I think it goes without saying your mentor should look at it too. But sometimes that's not always in an applicant's control. So always find that second set of eyes, even if it's the person sitting next to you right now. All right, now another positive. Do you remember any applications that really stood out for you and got you very excited? And if so, tell us a little bit about one.
Well, I mean, I think I've kind of alluded to this earlier. So one of them was, it was an area of really looking at a way of going after a treatment in a novel way, in terms of looking at a mechanism for how they could really monitor the flow within the lymph system. Was one of the proposals that I remember from a while back as being a very interesting way of looking at how you could get at that ongoing dynamic flow within the body. And I thought it was something I'd never considered, and it was a very interesting proposal to read. The other type of proposal came in from, as you alluded to earlier, Amy, and when you were setting up, is somebody who's had a personal tragedy in their lives and they've completely pivoted. So as I said, journeys may be winding in terms of leading people to, but they brought with them skill sets that they then apply into areas of fundamental research, because their family member was suffering from a disease that they wanted to contribute to a better understanding, and they were using their background in digital to actually do better analyses to see if signals and could be better understood from ongoing clinical trials, as well as early models into the disease. So there you're looking for, what is that connection to the science, and how does that translate over into something that may be of beneficial to the area or to the development of the future scientist.
So when we were all learning how to write the 5-paragraph essay, we were told to write the 5-paragraph essay, conclude with the introduction, and then check those two match at the end of the day. I'd just like to pitch that your personal statement is your introduction and your conclusion, because it allows to tell the story of you as a scientist, and it allows you to tell the story you want our readers to know about how all of this fits together. And you're the voice that's going to bring it all together. And I've heard our committee members say, this applicant just didn't take advantage of the personal statement. I can't judge the pieces. It's not written out for me. It's not coalescing. And so do take advantage of that. And that's the part of the letter you can have your mom read, or your sister. That should be in lay language for anyone to understand. But that's your option to tell your story for you and make sure all those pieces fit together with it. Now, I'm about to open the floor for Q&A, but before I do, or while everybody's getting their questions ready, feel free to pop them in the chat. I want you to just tell me your list of do's and don'ts for applying for PhRMA Foundation grants, or even other grants.
Well, I mean, I think it's be yourself. You just hinted at it. Tell your story. Be strong on areas, of your achievement, but be humble on the extent of the impact, right? It's that subtle brag, as it were. You rather want the committee member to be saying, I think they've undersold the value and the impact here. And we are looking, and I think Amy will agree here, we are looking to fund. We're looking for the reasons to believe, but what we want is to be balanced. And so I would say it's the Goldilocks that you've got to look for. How do you convince and be persuasive while still coming through this in terms of humble, in terms of where you are in that overall journey?
All right, so I'm going to go to the Q&A in the chat. Which application document do I read first, and why? That doesn't matter, because I don't judge any of them. But to answer your question, I read the research impact questions first, because I think that's most interesting. But Dave, which part do you read first?
Well, I actually go to go to understand the student. So I'll go to the personal letter first, and then I'll come back to there I want to see do I hear a voice, and then I look at the rest of the documentation to say, does that voice continue to resonate with me as I go through the documents?
Thank you. So how many preliminary data does the proposal need? For a postdoctoral award, does the award support early stage discovery, for example, drug screening based on successful preliminary data, or characterization of newly discovered small molecules?
So what we want to see, it strengthens your proposal if you have that preliminary data, right? So how much, again, it's going to be proposal based, right? In terms of what you want to have is sufficient in that early data. And if you're going to talk about it was a newly discovered small molecule, let's say your characterization of that small molecule should be really part of your preliminary data, because you can go out and get characterization of what does this with this small molecule hit. So it's a range of data that we're looking for, and it's really it's the teaser. The preliminary data is the teaser to say, if you fund this, there could be a lot of goodness that comes from it as we go forward.
So we had a question about drug delivery, and David, I don't know if you have an answer to this question, but one applicant works on improving the manufacturing of tablets, and what are some do's and don'ts for such applications? I will say this, one of the highlights of me coming on to this work is I got to meet one of the tablet makers for Paxlovid. Literally, the woman who was helping doing the medicinal chemistry to make the pill I met early in my career here. That was awesome. And so, David, do you have an answer for this question? Because we do intend to have a drug delivery webinar, maybe not in time for this cycle, unfortunately.
Yeah, so the if you're looking on the drug delivery, what you're looking for is there are met needs in this space, right? There's sometimes is it a gel, is it a tablet? If there's ways of doing this so that it's consistent, that's what I look for in proposals that were coming through internally. I would look at the consistency of these types of proposals.
I do think everything, Dave, you've shared today applies across the board. We do have another delivery question for faculty starter grants, and the question is on a formulation that is broadly applicable to several diseases or focusing on the delivery system for a single disease. The committee is looking for something that has applicability across diseases, but oftentimes if you focus on one disease but explain that applicability, that's acceptable. Dave?
Yeah, it would come to the impact, right? So yes, as Amy's alluding to, if you've got a broad platform that's applicable across a whole host of therapeutic areas, that's great. But if you have one which can turn, um, if you like, a multi-injection into a single injection for a month from a daily injection, there's types of formulation that can actually, even though it's in a specific area, can actually show value and impact. That would get the committee interested.
Sounds good. So we do have a question about what our wording says on our website. So it says projects that focus exclusively on a single aspect will not be considered. Unfortunately, the rest of the text isn't in there, and I don't have it memorized. But can you explain from my lay person's opinion of the drug delivery category? You don't like throwing stuff up against a wall to see what sticks, and you don't like me too. So I'm just going to see if this fits into this target and this target. Can you explain a little bit about what you think is responsive and non-responsive?
So going back to this, what projects that focus exclusively on a single aspect, I'd need to see more of the wording around it. But what we are trying to get at here is we're looking at an applicability in a particular approach, right? So is it a new in vivo model? Is it a new single cell analysis? Is it a new pathway? Is it a new nodal point? I mean, you could say that they are focused exclusively on single aspects, but they have broader applicability. to a particular disease. So uh, I think that's where what the committee is looking. It's not so much that this is science for science sake. It's science for the impact into the therapeutic treatment and the benefits of health.
Thank you. And we have two administrative questions. What is the success rate of the fellowships and how many applications do we receive a year? So across all of our areas, we receive roughly 400 applications and we fund roughly 40 awards, which is about a 10% pay line. And I would love to raise more money and offer more awards. We, when the committees meet, they do have an alternate list. So sometimes if someone, especially in the postdoc category, has requested 24 months of support, but they get a faculty job or they get an industry job and they give us back the money, we go to the alternates. And they're usually in the pre-doc or postdoc category simply because they're lower funding models. And so we'll shift the money to the alternates. And so I just wanted to let you know that's how we do it. And I think it's a pretty competitive process, but so is research funding generally. All right, where are we? If I were pursuing a second postdoc that transitions into a completely new research direction for drug discovery, would that compromise my competitiveness? Now, let's take this opportunity, David, to talk about having more than one postdoc and how the committee looks at those.
So no, I mean I don't. This is when you look at drug discovery and development, right? You'll see people who will have varied interests, and their interests, they'll open up an area, and that area could be totally novel, and it will pull them in that direction so they become the subject matter expert in that area. I had a medicinal chemist who reported to me. He was a very good medicinal chemist. He was a very good project leader, but he had an interest in peptides. And he kept that interest in peptides, and it was no benefit to his career until that time we became interested in pursuing some peptide related projects. And he maintained his expertise and he developed it. So I think the drug discovery and development area does lend itself to people who have broad expertise across multiple areas, as well as having foundational in-depth in certain areas. So you're not going to be an expert in everything, but you can have an overview of everything and some areas of expertise, which you then can see the co and interdependencies that can give an advantage to actually go forward with a project.
Thank you. There's another question about citizenship. We do allow people who are citizens of other nations to compete for our grants, and you have to be matriculating within the United States at an institution. So if you win one of our awards, we don't send you a check in the mail to your apartment. We send it to the research grants office of your institution. So you do have to be at a US-based institution. When will the results of the recent grants announcement? As soon as possible. We're getting close, but unfortunately, Joanne Westfall and I are very busy, so we haven't gotten those out yet. Given the PhRMA Foundation is a pharmaceutical and industry-focused organization, is there an ideal candidate trajectory? Absolutely not. As I said, when somebody goes to industry, we're happy for them. And when they stay in academia, we're happy for them. And I don't get the sense, Dave, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't get the sense when somebody says, I want to go into industry or I want to stay in academia, that matters at all to the committee. I think it's not an issue, right?
It doesn't. One of the discussions that we had a long time ago with, I think it was when PhRMA sponsored the Researchers on the Hill, was to talk about the ecosystem. Yep. The ecosystem's composed of, yes, industry, yes, academia, NIH, and you also have biotechs as well. So it's that whole ecosystem. And what we want to do is ensure that there is sufficient STEM knowledge and engagement in that ecosystem to ensure that it stays alive and is healthy. So going into academia with a knowledge of what makes a good target or what makes a good model or what makes a good screening tree is all of a benefit to the ecosystem. So there's no real trajectory in any of the discussions that we have.
Fantastic. So we are running out of time. So let's see, what do we have? So the vision and questions and significant sections of the applicant should be professional. They should be scientifically valid. And remember, we try to match by keyword expertise, but we don't always. And so there is a possibility that somebody looking at your application may not be an expert in what you're an expert in exactly. So you need to make it understandable for a scientist layman to understand. Would you recommend that applicants contact PhRMA Foundation before submission to ask if the idea fits a specific research area? You can always write to info@pharmafoundation.org and we'll do our best to answer. But remember, we administer the programs, but guys like Dave and others do the work. So we will give you our best shot, but our answers on info@foundation.org are not guaranteed. With regards to AI, we do allow learning model and AI aspects to our research. Absolutely. Let's see. I work on drug discovery for a viral epidemic that happened a couple of years back outside the United States. Would you consider project on drug delivery for future pandemic preparedness? Absolutely. I mean, we know that the COVID vaccine happened because of MERS and SARS, right? So that we had to look at former pandemics to get to the future one. So I would encourage you, that would be exciting to look at. Are preliminary data a big deal for pre-doctoral fellowship applications? Dave, do you want to speak to that?
Well, I remember what I said. Your preliminary data could come from a variety of sources. It isn't necessarily what you've generated yourself in that sense, because yes, you've got limited experience and you're really finding your feet in whichever lab environment you're in, but you can draw it off what was being done in the lab or in the literature to give you that bias, as it were, or that feeling that you've got an initial foundation that is supportive of the proposal that you're making. So it's not that you've got to have a lot of your own preliminary data at this point. If you do, it's a plus, but it's not something that would rule you out if you didn't.
Is it possible to be eligible for a PhRMA Foundation pre-doc fellowship if my project is not funded by an R01 while other projects are? We judge the project based on the project.
Yeah.
Yep. So we have more questions. You can see the questions, right?
Yes, I'm just pulling them up now.
See if there are any you want to answer because we are at 2 minutes. So answer one more question and then we'll go to the end slides.
If a student proposed an in vivo drug screening system for disease which could expand to other disease in the future, does it fit the scope of the drug discovery pre-doctoral fellowship program? Yes, I mean, I particularly like the in vivo screening. I think Amy will tell you this, that it's one of the things that I look at because I see it as a way of doing a translation of bedside to bench back to bedside, is to actually look at the linkage here. We know that the physiological systems can be different, but it does teach us some of the interplay that may be going on. So yes, that would, for me, it would be an interesting proposal to look at.
Fantastic. Well, I know that we had more questions than we could answer. So I would ask Emily to bring up the slides. It's pretty clear that we've got a lot of delivery people on here. So we'll figure out a way to bring you an expert in delivery and do another webinar on that. We have lots of free resources. I know we only give out about 40 to 50 awards a year, and yet so many of you apply, that we do have resources on crafting clear and compelling research aims, which we'll talk about that interdependence, and then how to write a letter of interest. That's on our YouTube channel. We have a blog on quick and dirty grant application checklists, and then do's and don'ts for the LOIs and grants. So do check out the resources as you're putting your projects together in this LOI stage. And every cent we get from our supporters, which you see here, goes right out to researchers every year. And so without them, we could not offer you these programs. And we are a small team of 3, but we're here to help you. So feel free to reach out to us, and please keep up with us on Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube, where you'll see when our different grant announcements come out. So thank you, Dave. I very much appreciate your time. And thank you, audience, for sticking with us. Have a great day.